Welcome to Mafia Stories, where every story reveals more than crime and power. Here, you'll discover loyalty, betrayal, romance, ambition, and the choices that shape a lifetime. Most people believe the worst mistakes in life happen because someone lies. I used to believe that too. Then I learned that the deepest regrets are often born from believing a story before hearing the truth. My name is Ethan Parker, and for nearly 2 decades, I built a reputation that few people dared to challenge. As the head of one of New York City's most influential Korean crime families, I learned early that hesitation could cost everything. Every decision had to be quick. Every threat had to be anticipated. Every secret usually carried danger. Living that way for so many years changed more than my instincts. It changed the way I looked at people. Trust slowly became something I measured instead of something I freely gave. Yet despite the walls I built around myself, one person somehow found her way through them. Maya Johnson. My wife. A beautiful young black woman who never seemed impressed by expensive cars, private security, or the respect my name commanded. She cared about things that my world had almost forgotten. She remembered birthdays. She volunteered at local charities without telling anyone. She greeted every employee in our home by name and somehow knew details about their families that even I had never taken the time to ask. Wherever Maya went, people relaxed. Wherever I went, people stood a little straighter. Together we somehow created a balance that I believed could never be broken. At least that was what I believed until the small changes began. Maya started leaving the house several evenings each week without explaining where she was going. She answered certain phone calls in private and quietly changed the subject whenever I asked about them. Sometimes she returned home exhausted, but instead of complaining, she smiled gently and simply told me everything would make sense one day. Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they planted questions that refused to disappear. My advisors noticed the distance growing between us. One investigator claimed she had been meeting with attorneys. Another reported repeated visits to a community medical center. Someone else mentioned unusual financial transfers connected to accounts I had never seen before. None of them accused her directly. They only suggested possibilities. Unfortunately, I had spent too many years surviving in a world where possibilities often became reality. I convinced myself that asking more questions would only encourage better lies. Instead of talking honestly with the woman I loved, I quietly ordered a private investigation. Every report added another unanswered question. Lawyers. Hospital visits. Confidential meetings. Documents that seemed incomplete. Looking back now, I realized that I was collecting pieces without ever seeing the full picture. Fear has a remarkable way of transforming uncertainty into certainty when pride refuses to wait for the truth. One rainy evening, after weeks of silent suspicion, I asked Maya the question that had been haunting me. Tell me what you are hiding. She looked at me with calm eyes that carried more sadness than anger. After a long silence, she answered softly, I cannot tell you yet because someone else's future depends on my silence. I heard every word she spoke, but I chose not to understand them. The following morning, I instructed my attorney to prepare divorce papers. When Maya arrived at my office, she quietly read every page without arguing or defending herself. She signed her name with steady hands, removed her wedding ring, placed it beside mine, and slowly stood to leave. Before reaching the door, she turned toward me one final time and said, "One day, you will know why silence was my only choice." I watched her walk away believing I had protected my future. I had no idea that I had just walked away from the only person who had been protecting mine. The sound of the front door closing stayed with me long after Maya had disappeared from view. I remained standing in the foyer with my hand still resting on the polished wooden railing, staring at the empty entrance where she had quietly walked away carrying nothing more than a single suitcase. I expected relief. That was the emotion I had promised myself would arrive once everything was over. Instead, the silence that settled over the house felt unfamiliar, almost heavy enough to hear. The mansion had not changed overnight. The marble floors still reflected the morning sunlight. The artwork remained perfectly arranged along the walls. Every expensive piece of furniture stood exactly where it had always been. Yet somehow the entire place felt empty in a way that money could never repair. My staff moved through the day as professionally as always, but even they spoke more softly than usual. During dinner, the chef prepared my favorite meal out of habit before quietly apologizing because he had forgotten that Maya was always the one who reminded him to join the rest of the employees for family-style meals after finishing work. The apology caught me by surprise because I realized I had never noticed that tradition until it disappeared. The following morning, I walked into the kitchen expecting to find fresh flowers arranged beside the breakfast table. The vase was there, but it stood empty. One of the housekeepers explained that Maya personally picked new flowers every Wednesday from a neighborhood florist because she believed fresh colors made stressful mornings feel a little lighter. I had lived in that home for years without ever asking where those flowers came from. Later that afternoon, I wandered through our bedroom and opened the large walk-in closet. Half of it was now empty. Maya had taken only everyday clothes, several family photographs, a few worn novels, and an old denim jacket she had owned long before we met. Every expensive handbag remained on its shelf. Every piece of jewelry I had given her rested untouched inside its velvet boxes. Even the designer dresses she wore to charity events were hanging exactly where she had left them. If she had planned to leave me for personal gain, she had abandoned everything people usually fight to keep. That thought lingered in my mind far longer than I wanted to admit. Over the next several days, I found reminders of her in places I had never bothered to notice before. Handwritten recipes tucked inside cookbooks for the kitchen staff. Birthday cards prepared months in advance for employees' children. A basket near the front entrance filled with umbrellas because she worried delivery drivers might be caught in unexpected rainstorms. She had quietly filled ordinary moments with kindness while I had been too distracted to see any of it. One evening, my longtime driver hesitated before asking if I planned to continue Maya's annual scholarship donation to a local elementary school. I looked at him in confusion because I had never heard about it. He seemed equally surprised that I did not know. He explained that every year Maya personally visited the school without cameras or publicity to help students whose families struggled to afford supplies. She never attached my name to those donations because she wanted the children to feel supported rather than indebted. As he spoke, I felt something inside me begin to shift. The woman I believed had been hiding selfish secrets had spent years quietly changing other people's lives without expecting recognition. That night, I sat alone in my study looking out across the Manhattan skyline, asking myself a question that had never entered my mind before. What if I had spent months searching for evidence against the one person who had never stopped protecting everyone around her, including me? The question refused to leave my mind. By the next morning, I canceled every unnecessary meeting and locked myself inside my office with the investigation files that had convinced me my marriage was beyond saving. For the first time, I stopped reading them as a husband desperate to confirm his fears and started reading them as a man searching for facts instead of assumptions. The difference was immediate. Details that had once appeared suspicious now seemed strangely incomplete. Entire conversations had been summarized instead of recorded. Several photographs captured Maya entering buildings, yet none showed her leaving or explained why she had been there. Financial reports highlighted transfers between charitable organizations but ignored the public records identifying those organizations as registered nonprofit foundations. It was as if someone had carefully arranged every piece of information to encourage one conclusion while quietly hiding every explanation that challenged it. I called the lead investigator into my office and asked him to walk me through every report from the beginning. He answered confidently at first, repeating the same conclusions I had accepted weeks earlier. Then I began asking different questions. Who verified these assumptions? Who interviewed the people Maya met? Why were there no complete surveillance logs? Why were receipts missing from several dates? The confidence in his voice slowly disappeared. Eventually he admitted that some information had been considered irrelevant because it did not support the original objective of determining whether Maya was hiding something from me. That sentence echoed inside my mind long after he stopped speaking. We had never searched for the truth. We had searched only for confirmation of my suspicions. Once I realized that, every page in front of me seemed to change. I ordered an independent review using a team that had never worked for me before. They approached the same evidence without knowing what I believed. Their first report arrived 3 days later, and the opening sentence alone made my stomach tighten. Several previous conclusions could not be independently verified. As additional documents arrived, an entirely different picture slowly emerged. The attorneys Maya met specialized in establishing educational trusts and protecting anonymous donors. The financial transfers funded scholarship programs, community health initiatives, and emergency assistance for families facing unexpected hardships. The medical center appeared repeatedly because it partnered with outreach programs for children requiring long-term treatment. None of those details had appeared in the reports that convinced me to end my marriage. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, remembering the evening I had demanded answers while refusing to offer trust. Maya had never denied keeping secrets. She had only insisted that revealing them too soon could harm someone else's future. At the time, I heard an excuse. Now I heard responsibility. Later that afternoon, my attorney called with another unexpected discovery. Maya had quietly removed herself from several charitable organizations immediately after our divorce because she believed public attention surrounding our separation might damage the programs she had spent years building. She protected them even after losing everything we shared together. She did not issue public statements. She did not defend herself in the media. She simply disappeared without asking anyone to choose her side. Sitting alone in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by papers that no longer felt like evidence but accusations against my own judgment, I finally accepted a truth more painful than any betrayal I had imagined. The investigation had not exposed Maya's character. It had exposed mine. I had allowed fear to become louder than love, and in doing so, I had mistaken the quiet strength of an honorable woman for the silence of someone hiding guilt. For several days, I stopped trying to prove myself right and started following the path Maya had walked without me. I visited the addresses that had once looked suspicious inside the investigation reports. One by one, the mystery surrounding her quiet disappearances began to dissolve, replaced by something I never expected to find. The first location was a modest community health center tucked between an old church and a neighborhood library in Brooklyn. It was not a place anyone from my world would notice while driving past. There were no luxury cars outside, no photographers, no signs carrying the names of wealthy donors. Inside, children laughed as volunteers prepared books and art supplies for an afternoon program. A nurse recognized Maya's photograph the moment I showed it to her. Her face brightened with genuine warmth. She told me Maya had visited almost every week for years, arranging transportation for families who could not afford regular treatments and quietly paying bills that insurance refused to cover. She never wanted recognition. She always asked the staff to thank the volunteers instead of her. I thanked the nurse and walked back into the cool autumn air feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. The next stop was one of the law offices that had appeared repeatedly in the reports I once considered evidence of betrayal. An elderly attorney welcomed me into his office after confirming my identity. He listened patiently before opening a cabinet filled with neatly organized folders. Every document carried Maya's signature beside plans for scholarship funds, educational grants, housing assistance, and confidential legal protections for families escaping financial hardship. The attorney explained that Maya insisted every contribution remain anonymous because she believed people accepted kindness more comfortably when they did not feel obligated to repay it. Then he shared something that made me forget to breathe for a moment. Months before our divorce, Maya had instructed the legal team to prepare long-term educational trusts that would continue helping children for decades, even if something unexpected happened to her. She planned farther into the future than I ever had. She simply never planned for me to become part of the reason those plans were interrupted. As I continued retracing her steps, another truth slowly emerged. Maya had not only protected struggling families. She had also uncovered financial misconduct involving several outside contractors who attempted to misuse charitable funds. Instead of creating a public scandal, she worked quietly with accountants, attorneys, and non-profit leaders to correct the problems without destroying programs that innocent families depended upon. Confidentiality agreements prevented everyone involved from discussing the details. That was the silence she had tried to explain. She had been protecting vulnerable people, legal investigations, and the future of countless children all at the same time. If she had revealed everything to me when I demanded answers, years of careful work might have collapsed overnight. Suddenly her final words echoed inside my mind with painful clarity. Someone else's future depends on my silence. She had never asked me to trust a lie. She had asked me to trust her character. I had failed the simplest test our marriage ever faced. As the sun began setting over the Manhattan skyline, I returned to my office carrying copies of documents that revealed more about Maya than I had learned during our entire marriage. Every page reminded me that while I had spent years building influence through authority, she had quietly transformed lives through compassion. I had believed power came from controlling information. Maya understood that true strength often came from protecting people who would never know the sacrifices being made on their behalf. For the first time since she walked out of my life, I understood that the greatest secret she had ever carried was not hidden because she did not trust me. It was hidden because she refused to betray the trust that others had placed in her. 2 mornings later, my attorney called and asked if he could stop by the house in person. His voice carried a seriousness that immediately told me this was not another routine update. When he arrived, he placed a single sealed envelope on the conference table between us. My name was written across the front in Maya's careful handwriting. The sight of those familiar letters made my chest tighten before I had even broken the seal. The attorney quietly explained that Maya had left the envelope with his office months before our divorce. She had instructed him to deliver it only if I personally began searching for the truth instead of searching for someone to blame. Until that moment, he had been under strict legal instructions to keep it hidden. After offering a respectful nod, he left me alone with the letter. I stared at it for several minutes before finally opening it with hands that no longer felt steady. The first sentence immediately silenced every thought in my mind. Ethan, if you are reading this, it means you finally chose questions over assumptions, and that gives me hope for the man I always believed you could become. I slowly lowered myself into my chair and continued reading. Maya never defended herself against the accusations I quietly built because she knew the confidential work she had promised to protect involved families who had already experienced enough fear and uncertainty. She explained that revealing names, financial records, or legal investigations before they were completed could have destroyed scholarship programs, delayed medical treatments, and exposed vulnerable people to unnecessary hardship. She believed that carrying the burden alone was easier than risking someone else's future. As each page turned, I realized she had understood my growing suspicion long before I admitted it to myself. She wrote that she noticed the questions in my eyes during quiet dinners, the hesitation in my voice, and the distance that slowly replaced our conversations. She wanted to tell me everything countless times, but every promise she had made to those families demanded patience and discretion. Then I reached the paragraph that changed everything. Maya admitted that she had once considered asking me to trust her without explanations forever, but she knew that would have been unfair. Instead, she prayed that one day the truth would become public before our marriage collapsed under the weight of unanswered questions. She never imagined I would ask for a divorce before that day arrived. There was no bitterness in her words. No anger. No attempt to make me feel guilty. She simply described the heartbreak of watching the man she loved slowly lose confidence in the woman who had never stopped believing in him. Near the end of the letter, another confession waited for me. She wrote that the wedding ring she returned to my desk had never represented ownership or obligation. To her, it represented two people choosing each other every single day, especially when life became difficult. The day I stopped choosing trust, she quietly accepted that love alone could not carry both of us. Tears blurred the final lines until I had to wipe my eyes and read them again. I do not hope that you spend your life regretting what happened. I hope you spend the rest of your life becoming the man who will never repeat it, whether our paths ever cross again or not. When I finally folded the letter closed, the room felt impossibly quiet. Outside the large windows, the city continued moving exactly as it always had, but inside that empty office, nothing about my world remained the same. For the first time in many years, I was not thinking about influence, reputation, or control. I was thinking about forgiveness, and I was painfully aware that the first person who needed to earn it was me. For nearly 2 weeks, I carried Maya's letter everywhere I went. I read it before important meetings. I read it late at night when sleep refused to come. I even memorized certain sentences because I was afraid time might somehow soften the weight of the truth, and I no longer wanted comfort that I had not earned. One quiet Saturday morning, the attorney who had delivered the letter called again. This time he spoke only one sentence before hanging up. If you truly wish to understand Maya, go to Jefferson Community Learning Center at 9 o'clock today. He offered no explanation, and for the first time in years, I did not ask for one. The learning center stood on a peaceful street lined with old maple trees whose golden leaves drifted gently across the sidewalk. Children laughed somewhere inside the building, and parents stood outside holding coffee cups while exchanging friendly conversations before classes began. Nothing about the place resembled the world I had spent my life building. There were no luxury vehicles waiting outside, no security teams scanning every face, no carefully controlled entrances. It felt ordinary, and somehow that ordinary warmth made me hesitate before opening the front door. As I stepped inside, I immediately heard Maya's voice floating down the hallway. Calm. Gentle. Familiar. I followed the sound until I reached an open classroom where nearly 20 children sat in a circle listening to her read from a storybook. Every child watched her with complete attention, smiling as she changed her voice for each character. She looked exactly as I remembered, yet somehow different at the same time. There was a quiet peace in her expression that I had not appreciated while we were together because I had always been too distracted by my own responsibilities. She noticed me standing near the doorway but did not interrupt the story. She simply offered the children another warm smile and continued reading until the final page was finished. Only after every child had left the room with their teachers did she slowly walk toward me. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. We simply stood there surrounded by colorful drawings taped to classroom walls, two people carrying memories that suddenly felt much heavier than words. I finally broke the silence. I know the truth now. Maya looked into my eyes with the same quiet kindness I had once mistaken for secrecy. Do you know all of it? She asked softly, or only enough to regret what happened? Her question settled deep inside me because I realized regret alone changed nothing. I reached into my coat pocket and carefully unfolded the letter she had written. I have read this more times than I can count, I admitted. Every time I finish it, I discover another way I failed you. She lowered her eyes for a brief moment before taking a slow breath. I never wanted you to spend your life carrying guilt, Ethan. I wanted you to understand why I could not break my promise to those families. I nodded without trying to defend myself because there was no defense left to offer. I came here because I wanted to see the woman I stopped believing in. Instead, I discovered she never stopped being exactly who she always was. Maya smiled sadly, not with triumph or satisfaction, but with the quiet understanding of someone who had already accepted a painful chapter long before I did. Standing in that simple classroom, surrounded by books, children's artwork, and afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, I realized that the strongest person I had ever known had never ruled a city, commanded loyalty, or built influence through fear. She had simply chosen compassion every single day, even when the cost was losing the person she loved most. When I left the learning center that afternoon, I understood something I had spent years refusing to accept. An apology spoken once could never repair damage created over months of doubt. Words had ended my marriage, but only actions could prove that I had become a different man. I did not ask Maya for another chance because I had not earned the right to ask. Instead, I returned to my office and began changing the parts of my life that had taught me to mistake control for wisdom. The following Monday, I gathered every senior advisor who had worked beside me for years. They expected another strategy meeting. Instead, I looked around the room and admitted something none of them had ever heard me say before. I was wrong. The silence that followed felt almost unbelievable. Some of them lowered their eyes. Others looked genuinely shocked. I explained that I had allowed assumptions to replace evidence and pride to replace trust. I accepted full responsibility for the decisions that followed. Then I announced several changes that would take effect immediately. Every investigation conducted under my authority would require independent verification before conclusions could be presented as fact. Anonymous accusations would no longer influence important decisions without supporting evidence. Every charitable partnership connected to our business network would be reviewed by outside auditors to guarantee complete transparency. If I expected honesty from others, I had to build a system that rewarded honesty instead of suspicion. A few advisors quietly resisted the changes, arguing that caution had always protected our organization. I listened carefully before answering with words I never imagined I would speak. There is a difference between being careful and becoming incapable of trust. I forgot that difference, and it cost me the person who mattered most. No one argued after that. News of the organizational reforms gradually spread throughout the people who worked with me. Some believed I had become weaker. Others quietly thanked me because they had spent years afraid that misunderstandings could destroy careers before anyone had the opportunity to explain themselves. I realized then that fear had shaped far more lives than only my own. Every unnecessary suspicion created another invisible burden carried by someone else. During those same weeks, I returned to the learning center several times, but never without permission and never expecting Maya to stop her work for me. Sometimes I helped unload boxes of donated books. Other afternoons I assembled classroom shelves or carried supplies from delivery trucks into storage rooms. The volunteers treated me like anyone else. They handed me work gloves, pointed toward another stack of boxes, and thanked me with simple smiles. Nobody cared about my reputation outside those walls. They cared whether I showed up, whether I kept my promises, and whether I treated people with respect. Maya noticed the consistency but never commented on it. She simply observed from a distance as I slowly learned lessons she had understood all along. One evening, after everyone else had gone home, we found ourselves locking the front doors together. She looked at me quietly before asking a question that carried no anger, only gentle curiosity. "Why do you keep coming back?" I looked at the empty playground across the street where the last rays of sunlight stretched across the swings. Because for the first time in my life, I answered honestly, I am trying to become someone whose presence brings people peace instead of pressure. Whether you ever forgive me or not, I do not want the man who hurt you to be the man I remain. Maya did not answer immediately. She simply looked toward the fading sunset, and for the first time since our lives had fallen apart, the silence between us no longer felt like distance. It felt like hope quietly learning how to breathe again. The seasons changed almost without me noticing. Autumn surrendered to winter, and winter slowly welcomed the first signs of spring. Somewhere between those passing months, I stopped counting how many times I visited the learning center because it no longer felt like a place I was trying to impress anyone. It had quietly become part of my life. Every Saturday morning I arrived before the doors opened to arrange tables, unpack donated school supplies, and help prepare breakfast for families attending weekend programs. Children who had once looked at me with curiosity now greeted me by name. Parents who knew nothing about my past simply thanked me for carrying heavy boxes or fixing broken chairs. For the first time in decades, I experienced what it meant to be valued for my presence instead of my position. Maya noticed every change, although she rarely spoke about it. She observed the consistency that could never be faked. I never asked for recognition, never searched for opportunities to explain myself, and never tried to erase the past with dramatic promises. I simply returned, week after week, allowing my actions to speak more honestly than my words ever had. One cool afternoon, after finishing a community reading event, Maya invited me to walk with her through a nearby park. Families filled the walking paths while children chased one another beneath blooming cherry trees. We spoke quietly about ordinary things that once would have seemed unimportant. Favorite books. Childhood memories. Teachers who had changed our lives. For nearly an hour, neither of us mentioned the divorce. It was the first conversation we had shared in a long time that was not weighed down by regret. As we reached a weathered wooden bench overlooking a small pond, Maya stopped walking. Resting on the bench was a simple envelope with my name written across the front in handwriting I immediately recognized. Confused, I looked toward her. She smiled softly before encouraging me to open it. Inside were two familiar objects wrapped carefully inside white tissue paper. Our wedding rings. I stared at them without speaking. Maya gently broke the silence. I carried them with me because I did not know whether they represented an ending or a lesson. Today I finally know. I looked at her with questions I could not put into words. She reached for one of the rings and held it in the palm of her hand. I am not giving these back because everything has been repaired, she said quietly. Some wounds become scars, and scars deserve respect. I am giving them back because I no longer see the man who chose fear over trust. I see someone who chose to change even when no reward was guaranteed. My eyes filled before I could answer. I had imagined countless versions of this moment, yet none of them prepared me for the grace standing in front of me. I do not deserve this, I admitted honestly. Maya nodded with gentle understanding. Perhaps not, she replied. But forgiveness has never been about deserving. It has always been about deciding whether the future should remain imprisoned by the past. We stood together as a light breeze carried pink blossoms across the pond, settling quietly around our feet. Neither of us rushed to place the rings back on our hands. There was no dramatic promise and no perfect ending waiting for us beneath that evening sky. There was only two people who had been changed by pain, standing side by side with something far more valuable than certainty. We finally possessed the humility to rebuild trust one ordinary day at a time, understanding that the strongest relationships are not held together by flawless beginnings but by two hearts willing to grow after they have been broken. Almost 1 year passed before I finally understood that healing does not arrive with a single conversation. It grows quietly through ordinary mornings, honest choices, and promises that are kept when nobody is watching. By then, the Learning Center had become a permanent part of both our lives. Every Saturday, Maya and I stood side by side welcoming families through the front doors, organizing book drives, preparing meals, and celebrating students who reached milestones many people would have overlooked. The work never made headlines. There were no cameras waiting outside and no speeches celebrating generosity. There were only grateful smiles, children's laughter echoing through bright hallways, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that someone would leave with a little more hope than they had when they arrived. My own organization had changed as well. Transparency replaced suspicion. Independent oversight became standard practice. Young employees who once feared speaking honestly now shared ideas without wondering whether every mistake would define their future. I still carried responsibility, but I no longer confused authority with wisdom. Maya had taught me that the strongest leaders do not demand trust. They earn it patiently, one decision at a time. One warm spring afternoon, the Learning Center held its annual community celebration in the neighborhood park. Families spread picnic blankets across the grass while local musicians filled the air with gentle melodies. Children ran between tables carrying painted kites and colorful balloons. Maya stood beneath a large oak tree helping a group of students choose books to take home for the summer. Watching her from a distance, I realized that nothing about her kindness had ever depended on whether we were together. She had always lived with the same generous heart. The only thing that had changed was my ability to truly see it. After the event ended, we remained behind to help clean the park. As the last volunteers waved goodbye, we found ourselves sitting on the same weathered bench where she had returned our wedding rings months earlier. Without saying a word, Maya reached for my hand. This time, neither of us hesitated. We slipped the rings back onto each other's fingers, not as people pretending the past had never happened, but as two people who understood exactly what those simple circles represented. They were no longer symbols of certainty. They were reminders that love survives only when humility walks beside it. We stayed there until the sun slowly disappeared behind the skyline, watching children chase fireflies across the open field while parents called them home for dinner. The peaceful evening felt more valuable than every luxury I had ever owned because peace cannot be purchased. It can only be built through character. Sometimes people ask me what the greatest lesson of my life has been. They expect me to speak about power, success, influence, or survival. Instead, I always think about one quiet woman who refused to betray her principles even when it cost her the person she loved most. I remember the silence I misunderstood, the trust one failed to protect, and the grace I never deserved but was blessed to receive anyway. If my story has taught me anything, it is this. Power may command respect for a season, but truth earns trust that lasts a lifetime. Pride can destroy in a single moment what love spent years creating. Yet when humility replaces certainty and compassion becomes stronger than fear, even the deepest regret can become the beginning of redemption. That is the future Maya gave me, and every single day since then, I have tried to prove that her faith was never misplaced.